all of us in the world, and all of us working in the field of social change still in many different ways carry some tiredness from the last year and a half and what that's meant. And at the same time, particularly in our field of social change, we are being asked to do much more than ever before. This is a moment of urgency for so many of the different issues we care about. And so it really does require that really important bridge between the inner and the outer. And so with that, I'm going to pass it to Parker, who is going to take us into our session today. Parker, over to you.
Well, thanks, Aaron, and welcome to everyone. And special welcome to our honored guest author, Sharon Salzberg. So good to be with you. We love your work, and so it's going to be a lot of fun talking about it. My refrain today, both spiritually and market-wise, is going to be get real. We just need to get real about everything we're dealing with, including ourselves, and we need to get real in this sense. We need to get online with our favorite bookseller and get real change. And if change isn't the thing you're looking for, you will see at your favorite bookseller that Sharon has a whole real series. It's kind of like a Hollywood franchise, really, that's moving forward in the world in a wonderful way. Real love, real happiness at work, real change, and real life, which comes next. And I'm promoting a capstone book for the series just called Get Real, which would actually just be an ad for all the other books in case she's tired of writing. So there's that, okay, for starters. That's how, as Aaron said, we're going to frame things today in terms of Sharon's wonderful, beautiful, life-giving work. And I'm very grateful for all she's done in these books for two big reasons. One is her steady emphasis on the fact that bridging our inner and outer lives is absolutely critical for real anything. If it's just happening on the outside or just happening on the inside, it hasn't yet gone through the formality of getting real. But when those two are synergetically related, and we're building that bridge between our inner reality and the outer world as it is and as we would like it to be, that's when the rubber hits the road and things get real. The other is just that her steady emphasis on this notion of reality. I don't think I'm alone at this webinar or in this world by saying that I've spent plenty of time in the land of illusions. I mean the kind of illusions we generate about ourselves, our powers, our capacities, our needs, and the kind that every nation and every culture generates about itself, self-serving illusions that ultimately fail us. So getting real, I think, is a precondition to dealing with all of our issues. We have to stay grounded in the reality about ourselves, others, the dynamics of the world around us. In my country, for example, are we experiencing the normal play of democracy, or is something else happening that's not as life-giving as the normal ups and downs, in and out struggles of a democratic system? We've got to stay grounded in all of those realities, including what it is that we're not only called to do, but are able to do, and still sustain a meaningful life on Earth. How do we intersect with all of those realities going on around us? It's a very simple lesson, but often hard to learn. Illusion is comforting for a while, but it always lets us down. It just never fails to fail. And getting real means that we already have our feet on the ground, and that's a very good place to be. In my own experience, I've learned that personally, psychologically, through struggles with depression, which required me to get real about myself and the world. And I've learned it politically in every effort I've ever made to engage with others in positive social change. So one of the ways I've framed this for myself as we move towards Sharon's books and her ideas and her practices is I've asked myself why, when someone comes to us saying, I'm so disillusioned about this or that, why do we commiserate with that person? Why do we put a hand on their shoulder and say, I'm so sorry? We should be saying, congratulations. You've just lost an illusion about this or that, which brings you that much closer to reality. Is it hard to be disillusioned about another person, a job, a situation, a political process? Of course it is. But you're moving closer to a grounded reality from which you might get leverage and take positive action on that issue, that situation in your life, every time an illusion gets stripped away. To me, that's become a very important principle, is to reframe my moments of disillusionment and ask myself, how did that happen? How did I get sucked in to, or actually help create an illusion about something that has now failed me and sometimes failed other people? If it's failed me, it may well have failed lots of lives that I touched, or just people in general who get let down by systemic illusions and hardly know what's happening. So I really think it would help as a practice if we could learn to congratulate people who are disillusioned and actually say, well, let's hang together here and see how we can disillusion each other even more, and take a journey together toward a grounded reality from which we can act. I've tried that a couple of times, and it works maybe half the time. So just, maybe do not do this at home, just in other situations. I'm going to offer one more reframing or definition before we turn to Sharon. And that has to do with the word contemplation, or I guess meditation, or trying to see inside of life and inside of ourselves, which for me is what contemplation is all about. I've said on this webinar before that in my personal history, I found that a lot of recommended modes of contemplation didn't work for me. That's fine. It's different strokes for different folks. But because they didn't work, and because I respected the people who engaged in those practices, I had to ask myself, so what's a good operating definition of contemplation in which I might find something that does work for me? And I came up with this: contemplation is any way a person has of penetrating illusion and touching reality. Contemplation is any way you or I have of penetrating illusion and touching reality. The reason I like that definition is that it doesn't tie me into traditional practices, which, as good as they are for many, many people, might not work for me. But it allows me to look at experiences in my life that turn out to be contemplative experiences, that is, illusion penetrating experiences, allowing me to get closer to reality and to retrieve what I can learn from those experiences, rather than just add them to my list of regrets of things I wish never happened. The most obvious example is failure. We all move in worlds in which failure is not much honored. We all move in worlds in which failure is often turned into shame. We all move in worlds in which we, for at least a certain portion of our lives, feel like we've got to pretend that everything is just fine and I'm winning all the games rather than ever acknowledge a failure. And yet, for me personally, and I'm sure this is true for lots of other folks as well, some of the deepest and most profound illusion penetrating experiences in my life have been found in failure. I remember once sitting at a lunch table with a group of 6 or 8 faculty at a workshop that I was doing at a large university. They were all men, and somehow the conversation turned to courses that they had failed in college. Kind of a rare conversation among people with Ph.D s, but here we were talking about it because some vulnerable soul got us underway. And I listened to story after story of the guy whose parents wanted him to be an MD. He failed organic chemistry. And that, he said, after pain and struggle, turned him toward his true love, which was 18th century English literature. And he'd been teaching that ever since with great satisfaction and effectiveness for students. Every faculty member at that table had such a story. I had one myself, I won't bore you with it here. When we stood up to go back to the session, I said, just before we leave the table, can I ask a question? And they said, sure. I said, how many of you have ever told that story to your students? And not a single hand went up. I said, please, I implore you, when you go back to class, tell your stories at some appropriate point in the term, because you've got a lot of students sitting there feeling like failure is shame, and they're in the middle of it right now. They need to hear the hopeful word that getting disillusioned about a capacity you thought you had or that someone else had insisted you must exercise can actually be a doorway into reality and the new life that it brings. So, Sharon, I rest my case about everybody going out and getting real. And I'm going to add one more question to our little stack of questions here to turn it over to you. And that is, as tired as most of us are from the struggle for positive social change and for care of the wounded, how can we hold the sense that there's so much more we're called to do, given all the suffering in the world?
Wow, thank you for all of that. Maybe Parker, I'll say a few words in praise of you before I go on and then do a practice. We can just go back and forth the entire time, which I'm sure will be excruciating for everybody else. But before that, even I started thinking, I don't think I failed anything in college. Maybe I didn't take enough risks. Oh no, maybe I wasn't bold enough. And then I remembered I got a few incompletes for a while because I got a year of independent study credit for going to India and learning meditation. That was a big deal. And then in order to fulfill those course requirements and not having completes, I did papers on things like Buddhism and Marxism, and I made things up, and I got grades, and then I graduated with 2 years of independent study credit. So that was innovative in its own way. But I admire you tremendously, Parker, of course, and I think you are one of the rare people for whom there's a kind of seamlessness between inner work and outer work. Many of us can remember actually the bridge, having started in one modality or another. And I certainly know many people, myself included, where the inner work was so compelling and a kind of personal healing was so compelling that it was a little later on in that process that the very real and apparent suffering of other people could be let in, and some sense of motivation to do something about it. And I know many people who have been called to really work on behalf of others, and it's only when they've maybe seen themselves slip further down into exhaustion and a sense of overwhelm and almost meaninglessness sometimes, as the work, is not fulfilling those very important goals right away, that they think, well, maybe there's inner work as well that needs to be done that will join in. And so most of us, I think, can remember a leap one direction or another, and you really hold a place in my mind as somebody for whom they're so fused, they're so connected, that they're really integrated. So given that we're all exhausted and kind of overwhelmed, and it's not easy, I loved also what you said about disillusionment. Sometimes we call it disenchantment, and that doesn't sound that appealing either. We'd rather live in an enchanted world than something that's real. And yet, how reassuring to feel that we're in touch with some fundamental truth. We're not believing all those myths, maybe that we've been fed, some of which are incredible distortions of where happiness is to be found, where strength is to be found, how alone we are, all of that. And so I do see meditation practice as a way of getting real. And my response to that question is like, how do we, in a world of such incessant demands and things that are compelling, and we're so tired, how do we go on? And I'd say not even one day at a time. Sometimes it's one breath at a time. It's one small action at a time. It's not buying into the idea that what we have to contribute is not enough. It's never enough. But it's what we have in this moment. It's our joining in, it's our participating, it's our offering our hearts to someone and to this moment. And so I'd like to have us do a short practice, just helping us kind of gather our energy, come into the moment, remembering to breathe, and then take the very next step. So if you can just sit comfortably, you can close your eyes or not. Just be at ease. I am in New York City, so I am going to contribute a lot of noise, which we'll call sound. You can start by just listening to sound. It may be the sound of my voice. It may be other sounds. It's a way of relaxing deep inside and allowing our experience to just come and go. And bring your attention to the feeling of your body sitting, whatever sensations you discover. See if you can feel the earth supporting you. See if you can feel space touching you. Usually we think about touching space. We do think about picking up a finger and poking it in the air, but space is already touching us. It's always touching us. Bring your attention to your hands and see if you can move from that more conceptual level, let go of fingers, to the world of direct sensation, picking up pulsing, throbbing, pressure, whatever it might be. You don't have to name these things, but feel them. And bring your attention to the feeling of your breath, the actual sensations of the in and out breath, wherever you feel it most distinctly. The nostrils, at the chest or the abdomen. You can find that place, bring your attention there, just rest. See if you can feel one breath. You know, we can be in such a hurry and kind of hypervigilant, feeling like we have to be aware of the next 50 breaths right now, but it's just one. That's all we can be aware of, is this breath right now. Everything else is just a story. So it's just this one breath. We can let the breath be however it is. Our contribution is our presence, our complete wholehearted presence, just right now. If your attention wanders, you get lost in thought, spun out of fantasy, or you fall asleep, truly don't worry about it. Right in that moment, we have a chance to be really different. So instead of judging ourselves or belittling ourselves, see if you can just let go and return your attention to the feeling of the breath. It's just one breath. And it's happening anyway. All you need to do is feel it. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes or lift your gaze, and we'll end the meditation. So thank you. It's always good to remember to breathe.
Thank you, Sharon. Thanks so much. That did me a world of good. And there was one line in there that I wrote down. I want to hang on to it. Just one breath. Everything else is just a story. That's a keeper across all kinds of experiences. So I'm going to invite you to reflect for a while on this first movement that we identified that arises in your writing and in your teaching and in our lives. And that's the movement from powerlessness to agency, from powerlessness to agency. Let's talk about that a bit as we come from this centered place that your practice just took us to.
Oh, we're about to hear construction noise too, so sorry.
This part of the story.
It's part of the story. It's interesting, given what we were talking about with disenchantment or disillusionment, because there's another aspect, I think, of never losing a vision of possibility. That somehow we hold both. We hold the reality, because otherwise we're just floating above, we're disconnected from what people are really going through. We're disconnected from how difficult things are, how much time something might take. And, in meditation, in the meditative world, we'd call it, spiritual bypassing. Like it's all pure, it's all the way it's supposed to be, and without taking into account the very real difficulties of people. But if we're only immersed in the very real difficulties of people and disenchantment, then we do lose a kind of inspiration and sense of possibility. And they're both true. There's that vision, which I think we need to cultivate, and we need one another to help us cultivate it. I think there's a place for community that's very strong, and at the same time be in touch with the reality of things. Otherwise, we're so kind of unfair to ourselves. We think we should get everything done. We should get it done by tonight. We should be in charge of the universe, which we're not. And so for me, agency in part comes from making sure I am reminded of that vision, whatever it might be. And sometimes there's good news, there's the delightful ways people are caring about one another, or something like that. That's part of it. And part of it, I think, is recognizing that for me, that sense of powerlessness or helplessness is the most debilitating thing I feel. I've just seen that. And so reminding myself in those times, just one step, seems small, it seems negligible, it seems like it's only going to help one person maybe have a better day, but that's what you have to do. And not just sit there and be mired in that sense of helplessness. And as I've said before in these webinars, my idol is the Statue of Liberty, which ironically enough, I'm in New York City now and not in Massachusetts, and I don't have any little replicas around. In Massachusetts, I have many. I have to get more. That's the only answer. And what I learned in writing about her, actually for Real Change, is that she's a woman on the move. She's in mid-stride. She's taking a step. So everything she represents to me, like welcome, you belong here. There's a place for you. Even you that no one else wants is active. It's not just kind of laying back. And so sometimes I think about her. And okay, one small step, that's enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I would just lace through that a couple of other observations and welcome your response, Sharon. One is that there are people who objectively have been stripped of power by things like racism, sexism, heavy cultural poverty, heavy cultural economic impacts that make it very, very hard to rise up. Then there are a lot of other people who claim a sense of powerlessness for one of two reasons, or maybe both. One reason is, and I have empathy for this, we are rarely empowered in the institutions we pass through, educational and often religious, where where we are put in the audience position rather than the actor position. Do that for enough years in a young person or older person's life, and you get a sense of disempowerment because you've never had the encouragement or the opportunity, the situation, and the reward system to risk acting, to risk practicing your sense of agency. And so I don't think it can ever be underestimated how many millions of people have had a sense of agency systematically programmed out of them. And I'll say it out loud, that's not an accident. That's a feature of high control political and economic systems, which want to keep people oppressed, is the classic word, because that is a form of disarming people and thus making them easier to oppress. So some of us, I think, are called to just work within our own micro ecosystem to help liberate people from that particular prison. And then I think there are other people who invoke, and for these people I have less empathy, who have power truly, but invoke a sense of powerlessness as an excuse not to do anything. I don't think I have to rattle on about that, but when I hear such a person in dialogue, in conversation, I like to ask the question, powerless in relation to whom? In relation to the single mother who lives in the projects, trying to raise 2 kids well while going to 2 jobs, 16 hours a day. Looking at your life, my friend, I really don't think you're powerless in comparison to that. So maybe there are some questions in there that we ought to ask ourselves. I do think this is a very important issue in human psychology and spirituality, because I think this sense of powerlessness sometimes leads to outbursts of violence as people try to say, I've had it, I'm going to blow something up in order to prove that I can have power. And of course, violence to self comes out of that as well, that sense of powerlessness that makes me want to drown my life or anesthetize my life in something that's not life-giving. So I don't know how much more time we have on this particular topic, but what do you think?
Well, in terms of the first, I think that's part of what I learned, for the book Real Change. I interviewed a lot of activists, some of whom I'd already known, some of whom I just met in that context. And I remember, especially, and she appears early on in the book, a woman that I met who was one of the leaders of the striking fast food worker movement in New York, where people who were working in McDonald's or those places were striking for $15 an hour minimum wage and the right to unionize. And meeting quite a number of those people, I saw, first of all, they were very, very hardworking and had almost nothing. Any number of people were working full-time jobs and living in homeless shelters. And almost to a person, they would say, my parents, my family told me not to make waves, not to engage, not to do this, not to protest, because, I have almost nothing, and I will really have nothing if I challenge the authorities. And yet there was something in them, and this one woman really stands out as an example. who learned to love herself basically and respect herself enough that it was intolerable to be treated that way. And so the narrative changed about who she was as a human being and the kind of innate dignity of really every human being. And she said, I look at these young people just coming in to the job, and I think this can't go on. You know, I can't not participate and take the risk, you know, and do what I can do, because I can't see them growing up in that same mentality. And so having a break in that, buying into the story told about us and saying, I'm a human being. I deserve, as we all deserve, not just me, something better. And maybe that's a distinction, because it is a struggle more for me as well, you know, with people who they're doing all right, you know, and they really don't have to think about themselves as victims, but that's how they are portrayed. And yet there too, I suspect, you know, there's some profound disconnection with that basic, you could say, love for oneself, because in there, I think we find one another. And it's not just me, you know, or just my kind or something like that. So
yeah, such an important moment in life when you decide I am not going to participate in my own diminishment as a human being. I'm going to claim the right to name myself and claim my power. I'm not going to contribute to my own diminishment or conspire in it. So thank you. Where do you want to go next?
Oh, where do you want to go next? You're my guide.
Okay. Well, let's take on the second movement, which is the movement from grief to resilience. This seems to me to be a really, really important one. And I guess I'd start out with just a couple of observations and then see where you want to take us, Sharon. It seems to me that, you know, that these days it's pretty clear grief is omnipresent on the planet. From the pandemic to politics to the Earth's calamity at our hands, suffering at our hands. It's kind of crazy not to have grief moving through you. And I think it's a gut check. If I don't feel that grief, what's wrong with me? Which isn't to say that I'm valorizing suffering. I'm not. I don't believe in that. But there is reason to grieve, lots of reason to grieve in the macrocosm and in the microcosm. And I guess the common sense thing that comes to me when I think about that is how important it is to grieve when you need to grieve, and how important it is to be patient with that grief process, which is something that, in my experience, the world makes very difficult. I mean, a very concrete observation from my life, which many people have experienced, the death of my father, who was a very important person in my life back in 1994, plunged me into grief. And the place where I was working at the time was willing to hold me in that for maybe 48 hours. And then they just wanted me to get back to work. You could see it in people's eyes or responses. And of course, I was ultra vulnerable at the time, so maybe I was overreading this. But it was like, okay, we've given you time to grieve. You got a weekend plus 2 days off. So to go to the funeral and, you know, preach the eulogy. So let's get on with it. You know, there's work to be done. That was the feeling I had. And, you know, that added difficult emotions to the grief I was already feeling. I guess the first was, what's wrong with me if I can't man up, you know, on schedule, on demand, And the second was just really being pissed off at the response I was getting. You know, I don't think there's any systematic answer to this, but just as it's important not to conspire in our own diminishment, it's important to carve out somehow the space and time we need to grieve, and figure out maybe how to hold that as even a running stream in our lives, as long as we're not drowning in it. If we're drowning, then we have obviously other issues to think about. We need a life preserver. We may need CPR, but we have to get real about it and deal with it. So that's my brief thought about grief and its omnipresence. Where do you want to take us on that one?
Well, I think, you know, it's a powerful place for everybody, and maybe at different times, you know, doing it again, to really do reflection on, just as you just did for us, you know, very openly and honestly, just what is our own conditioning around loss, around change, around death, around grieving itself. Because I think we all have personal conditioning, you know, our own experience. And, you know, as you were speaking, I was thinking about my mother died when I was 9, and I was then living with my grandparents who, you know, and this brings in cultural conditioning as well, seem to think that the kinder thing to do for me was like never mention her name again, you know. And so I know I have a very distorted and kind of weird relationship to death from that, you know, which I've worked with and through in a lot of measure. You know, and just to understand the personal conditioning and the cultural conditioning, you know, here I'll speak for America, you know, I can't speak for other cultures or every culture within America, but, you know, there's such an emphasis on being in control at all times that betraying that in some way, being frightened, being sick, dying, undergoing loss is seen as humiliating. You know, it's like you've lost control. It's wrong. But why is it wrong? You know, it's like, it's just part of life. And so I think we bear the burden of that as well. Like I remember somebody in my kind of larger community circle of people died. And then, as one sometimes does, we watched other people involved with them behave very badly toward one another. You know, it happens sometimes within families, or in this case, it was a kind of chosen family, you know, and not a birth family. And people were just being dreadful to one another. And at one point, somebody said to me, because I was just confused, like, what is going on? And somebody said to me, don't you understand? Nobody knows how to grieve here. It's like, it's so hard to just be with those feelings and to honor them and allow oneself to feel them. And as you said, not necessarily get stuck there forever, but to really honor them in the fullness of their presence. And I thought about what this person said to me, and I thought, that's right. You know, like, whoever taught us how to do this? And here again, I come down to how helpful a community can be if we allow ourselves, if that's like the ethic, you know, we allow one another to basically feel what we feel and to honor the integrity of all those feelings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, the classic thing, of course, that we've all experienced is kind of, you know, well, as soon as you get over this, right, then, you know, then things are going to be fine again. The truth is, I've never gotten over my father's death. My father is a daily companion in my life. These days, when I look in the mirror, I see him, you know, because I look a lot like he did, and I have gestures and mannerisms that were like his. But it's a befriending presence. It's not a burden, and in that sense, the journey that I've taken, and I think lots of people have, is no longer a journey of grief. It's a journey of companionship and the joy that can come with that for the people that we really loved. So, without wanting to rush our schedules, but wanting to hear you out on these topics, I think the next movement is grief to the next movement is anger to courage. And here my script says, Sharon asks Parker about moving from anger to courage. So would you like to, would you like to ask me about that?
I would, but before I get to that, I just want to say something about resilience. It's, I think so much happens when we can honor the feeling that we're having instead of feeling it's wrong or humiliating or something to be frightened of. And I think resilience does get born. Resilience, not in the sense of avoiding anything but it's a kind of energy that understands almost like the fullness of life. And that change is part of it, loss is part of it, and only part of it, that there's the new companionship of your father and you, and there's a way of seeing memory in a different way, and understanding. I feel, for example, in looking at the death of some of my teachers, my meditation teachers who've been very important people in my life, and looking at younger teachers in the lineage of their approach, I feel like almost like some of the younger teachers have absorbed some of the strength and the wisdom of the older teachers who are now no longer with us. And I've kind of watched that, and I thought, like, what happened? Something entered them, that was not there before. And no doubt entered me as well, although I don't really, I see it, when I look outwardly. But, and it's just, it's like life in a bigger perspective, I think, is something that happens when we can just be with, the pain that is also genuinely true.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking, Sharon, triggered by your remarks, that all of the good people who've died unnecessarily, really, in the last 2 years of COVID-19 are with me at age 82 as a constant reminder of how precious life is, how much we're not in control, and how every moment of every day that I have the capacity to do so, I want to be a life giver rather than a death dealer, at least to myself and my wife and my grandchildren and so forth, if not on a larger scale. So that experience with my father, I think, is kind of alchemical in that it changes other experiences of grief as well.
So Parker, can you speak to us about moving from anger to courage?
I'm totally shocked by your question, Sharon. Took me totally by surprise. So let me think for a moment. I don't, in my own view, in my own experience, I don't know of any process for getting to courage. I've thought a lot about the courage question, partly because I established an organization called the Center for Courage and Renewal, really not knowing what I was talking about, and I still don't. Except I do know a couple things. One is that I think courage comes out of community in some alchemical way, especially as we're willing to share the fact that we're all struggling with the same thing in the deep aquifer of human life, where all these separate wells are actually joined at the same deep aquifer, and we're all wrestling with the same stuff. And even though nobody has an answer to it, that's sitting in that room, in that circle, of exploration. The fact that we're sharing the struggle together is somehow an answer in and of itself. And I think, I think that the community created by the Wellbeing Project functions that way for people. It certainly has helped me in that regard in the year and a half I've spent with you all. My observation is that courage is so often an instinct that arises in the moment. And I've frequently had this experience. I've asked people who took courageous acts in the moment around a critical situation, how did you find the courage to do that? And the answer has always been, oh, anyone would have done that. I was just there. Which is an answer that kind of ignores the fact that 200 other people were there and no one else did it. And so it isn't the case that anyone would have done that. It's the case that this person did that, conditioned by God knows how many vectors coming in on their life. It's got to be a very complex formula. Therefore, I don't think there's a technique for getting there. But what I do believe is that as we get clearer and clearer about what we care about, what we really care about, and what we love, we are much more likely to act to protect or preserve it when the moment comes. And often for people, this is a slow growing capacity. I mean, I think of on this, I'm not thinking of the Carnegie hero type of action right now. I'm thinking of all the K through 12 teachers that I've had the privilege to meet over the years who understand that their true caring is about the kids in front of them and those to come. And by cultivating that caring in concrete, practical ways, teachers, for example, who before they go to sleep the night before class will review a list of names of the kids that will show up tomorrow, either online or in person, and do their equivalent of whatever language they use, say a little prayer for each kid, focus on that kid, lift that, hold that kid in the light with a name, with an image, cultivate your caring. You're much more likely to act courageously in the moment by saying to a school administrator who's demanding something about state mandated tests that's killing your kids, say, no, I'm standing here between them and that danger to their lives, that threat to their psychological, spiritual, and educational well-being. Because those tests don't measure what's important. Nobody knows how to measure what's important. I'm not playing that game because I care most about these kids. I report to these kids, sir or madam, not to you. And ultimately, that's a kind of courage that gets, I think, cultivated by knowing clearly what it is we care about. So again, I rest my case.
That's fabulous. Well, sometimes I think we're drawn to anger because it's so energized, and that's the positive part of anger, is that it's not complacent, it's not passive. It helps us draw lines, have a sense of integrity, like saying no, that's not acceptable, and it's got energy, so it's really powerful and alluring in that way. And in the Buddhist psychology, they say anger is what we pick up when we feel weak because we think it's going to make us strong. So that goes back to the sense of agency. And I know if I sit with my own anger, say in meditation, And I just let the different feelings keep emerging because it's such a complex state. There are moments of fear and moments of grieving and moments of sadness. And there's always some element of helplessness in there. And if I can get down to there and then do one small action, it shifts. Not that the anger is bad or wrong, but if it's kind of incessant, and chronic, it also has certain consequences. Like if you think about the last time you were really angry at yourself, however long ago that was, it's not a time where, generally speaking, you think, oh, I did 5 great things that same morning. Those 5 great things are gone. All we remember is the stupid comment we made at the meeting. And so there's a kind of limitation in that. And I think of trying to move from anger to courage, which would mean not losing the discernment and the understanding, like this is wrong, according to my view, my seeing of it, and having the energy to move, to act. But where does that energy come from, if not from a kind of obsession? And so it seems strange, but I think about things like remembering to take in the joy, take delight in small triumphs, or that, beautiful scene in Madison, Wisconsin, with the sky as blue as it is, or, and not feeling guilty about that, but realizing this is all like fuel so that I have energy to respond to something instead of feeling just devastated by it, and not choosing to have anger as kind of my singular source of energy.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think many of us are in the same boat, but I've taken quite a journey with my own anger over the last 2 years, with this confluence of politics and the pandemic, which is just so crazy making. And I've certainly learned a few things about trying to, hold that anger as fuel for something, as energy for something worth doing, just as any emotion might serve. So our next and final step, Aaron, I saw a message from you, but I have no idea what it said because I have the wrong glasses on. So
I think this is where Parker, I'm super glad to jump in and support the glasses. So I think this is where we were going to invite Sharon to do a practice, actually.
Excellent. Let's do it.
Okay, so I thought this would be a nice time to do some loving kindness practice, which I'll guide. And, there are, of course, many ways of doing this, but the way I like to do it is just silently repeating certain phrases. So instead of resting our attention on the feeling of the breath, we rest our attention on the silent repetition of these phrases. And the phrases are meant to point our attention differently. Instead of just like chastising ourselves for how weak we are, what a failure we are, we wish ourselves well. Instead of ignoring somebody else, we actually hold them in our minds and wish them well. Things like that. So I'll just guide you through it. Again, if you want to sit comfortably, you can close your eyes or not. Let your attention just sink into your body. Feel yourself being present. And you can use any phrases that make sense to you. I'll offer some phrases that are commonly used, and if this is a new practice for you, you might choose to use them for this session so that you're not just thinking about phrases. So phrases I use are things beginning with, since we offer these to ourselves, to begin with, may I be safe, be happy, be healthy, Live with ease. Live with ease means in the things of day-to-day life, like livelihood or family, may it not be such a struggle. May I live with ease. May I be safe. Be happy. Be healthy. Live with ease. People often say to me, who am I asking? We're not asking anybody anything. We're gift giving. We're offering. It's like a blessing. May I be safe. Be happy. Be healthy. Live with ease. And the skill set's really the same. You gather all your attention behind one phrase at a time. And when your attention wanders, don't worry about it. See if you can let go and just come back. See if you can think of someone who's helped you or guided you, maybe a mentor, somebody who embodies the force of love for you. Could be an adult, could be a child, could be a pet. The idea is that this is someone who, when you think of them, you smile. So if there's someone like that who comes to mind, you can bring them here. Get an image of them or say their name to yourself, get a feeling for their presence, and offer the phrases of loving kindness to them. Even if the words don't make perfect sense, they're carrying the energy of the heart. May you be safe. Be happy. Be healthy. Live with ease. And there's someone you know who's struggling right now. They feel alone. Things are not working so well for them right now. Bring them here. Get an image of them or say their name to yourself. Get a feeling for their presence. And offer the phrases of loving kindness to them. And we'll just have a gathering, whoever comes to mind. Colleagues, friends, family, puppies. Let's see who appears. We'll offer loving kindness to the collective, to the group. May you be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. And then all beings everywhere, all people, all creatures, all those in existence, near and far, known and unknown. May all beings be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes or lift your gaze, and we'll end the practice session.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you so much. So to preserve some time for questions, I wish we had another hour, but let me ask you to just comment briefly on the final movement that we sketched out from your work, the movement from anxiety to equanimity.
Well, I think of equanimity as balance, which I've only grown lately to appreciate as a term. I used to think of balance as like mediocrity, but it's not that at all. I think it's more like what I was talking about before, being able to hold both things, a vision of possibility and maybe a very difficult immediate reality, a sense of aspiration, and the grief of thwarted expectations and how difficult things are for people, and gratitude for what we have and the abundance of life and the possibility of joy, and some real sorrow at what's present. And so to have a mind, a consciousness, a heart big enough to hold everything is how I see equanimity. And so that would mean, in a state of anxiety, if I was trying to help myself or talking to somebody trying to help them, I try to see what's missing. Sometimes there's such a kind of compelling look at what we're going through that just helping somebody get groceries, something external, is really the balancing act. Sometimes we're overwhelmed with taking care of others and taking a few moments to breathe, or to do something nice or appreciate something in our own lives, is the balance. And so I look at it that way.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thanks so much. So we're going to turn now to Aaron or Claire or some good friend here to introduce some questions from the community.
Yes, thanks everyone for chatting in, both comments and questions. Feel free to keep them coming. I'd love to start with this one here. For both of you, do you think that in search of learning to know how to grieve that you appear to be vulnerable, and that could be dangerous? People are not always drawn to vulnerable behavior and admire strength, not showing how they feel.
Well, I'll say a quick word about that. I try to refrain from falling apart vulnerability in public places because that I don't think serves anyone well. And that's a serious comment, not a blow-off comment on my part, because as I've said before, it took me 10 years after my first major depression to be able to write about it and speak about it in public. And the reason for that was simply this. I needed to be sure that I had integrated the experience of depression fully enough into my sense of self that I could stand up and freely and easily say, yes, I am all of the above. I am, the gifts I have and whatever light I'm able to shed. And I am this plunge into the deep darkness of self-annihilation called depression. I'm all of that. What you see is what you get. And frankly, being able to do that, but only after a decade of hard work on integration, has been enormously therapeutic for me. Because ultimately, I don't think there's anything more therapeutic when you're ready and able than showing up as who you really are on the face of the earth. That doesn't mean in every gory detail. Jung said the soul needs its secrets, and I say the same. But in certain regards, saying, I'm part of the human race, I bet you are too. Why don't we just welcome each other by getting real? So that's my answer. I'm going to need a cut, Sharon. I'm just going to need a cut.
You deserve a cut, I'll tell you. It's like, no doubt about that. And I would just add that was a beautiful answer, Parker. And I would just add, I equate in many ways vulnerability with honesty. And I think it's intriguing in different situations. How candid do you want to be? It may not be appropriate in certain gatherings, or contexts. But sometimes we can do a baby step, and I've seen it a lot in communication training where, for example, you might have seen people start out extremely accusatory, like you never show up for anybody and you're like a horrible person, and move through guidance to more expressive of what they had wanted that was then thwarted. Like I had wanted to be closer to you or to learn from you, and it didn't happen. So I was very disappointed. And that's being much more vulnerable, but it's also being much more truthful. And yet you may not want to go in that context too. I love that. The soul needs its secrets, and so you judge, you discern, where you would be.
Yeah. A good litmus test is, will it scare the horses? And if it doesn't, if it will, don't say it.
Thank you, Parker. Thank you, Sharon. That was beautiful. I think we have time for one last question before closing thoughts from both of you. So there was one question that was just that was put into the chat, which was, can one forgive without forgetting?
I think it's essential to forgive without forgetting, and one of my friends, my colleague Sylvia Borstein, once said, forgiving is not amnesia, but we think that it should be. And I think it's one of the complexities of even using the word forgiveness, is that we have so many different opinions and thoughts about what it means. And so many times I really honestly feel I've heard stories of profound movement toward love and so on, like the last thing you hear, if you visit the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., is a video testimony of people who were there, usually as, very young children. And this one woman, who lost her whole family in the Holocaust, said something like, "I've brought up my own children to love and not to hate, but I'll never forgive." And I thought, I'll take that, and I've heard so many stories like that where somebody will say, I've learned I have to let go of hatred, but I won't forgive. And so the word is so complex and difficult, deserves its own seminar series, actually. And yet, as a power, it's so liberating.
Yeah, I think you've just given two powerful examples, Sharon, of people who, at bottom, I see as refusing to conspire in their own diminishment. Not forgetting. While forgiveness, I think, takes many different forms. To me, the litmus test of forgiveness is, am I still dragging this around with me? Which is what I don't want to do. And how to keep from dragging it around, I think, takes multiple forms. But not forgetting, refusing to forget, is, I think, a simple part of that all-important thing called boundary setting in your own life. And living within the boundaries that nurture your identity and integrity, and not allowing them to be violated. I think it's very important to remember that violence, which we talk about a lot, takes many, many non-physical forms and always consists in words or actions that violate the identity and integrity of another. That's, I think, what violence is all about. And I think part of self-care is refusing to embrace or accept or internalize such words about ourselves. And that's a long journey. I get that, because it happens in very subtle ways as well as more overt ways. Yeah.
Thank you, Parker. Thank you, Sharon. So we have a couple of exciting announcements that we'll share just after the closing, including just to pick up on a couple of comments in the chat. When this wonderful and dynamic duo of Parker and Sharon will be back with us again next year, and the arc and the way that will be happening. So just to know that that's coming right after this. Parker, Sharon, would love to just invite some closing thoughts on this year-long series where you've sung and we've sung, where there's been poetry, there's been music, there's been a lot of really deep conversation, and we've really gone through this wonderful arc. I was just wondering if you have some closing thoughts for us for this series.
It would make me really happy is if Parker ended with a poem.
Oh, okay.
Because it's not really the end, right? As you'll get to, but it's now we're going to pause for a while. And so if you can lead off that pause with a poem. Yeah,
I would be delighted to do that. And I think it's a poem that's pretty much on target, and will also demonstrate my high-tech skill of knowing how to screen share something, so, which is going to be an important part of my next round of job applications. Just in case anybody out there is well connected, let me know. But I just want to say what a wonderful journey this has been with Sharon, with Aaron, with Claire and Alice and all the other good folks at Wellbeing. The only reason I'm glad that it's coming to an end for this year is that I will no longer have to polish my shoes every morning to show up on these webinars. So thank you so much. So, so here we are. Let's see if I can get this right. How's that? Can you see it? All right. This is a wonderful poem by William Stafford, one of my favorite poets, called A Ritual to Read to Each Other. And I think as I read through it, you'll easily see why it's connected to the threads we've been pursuing all year long, and most particularly today. A Ritual to Read to Each Other by William Stafford. If you don't know the kind of person I am, and I don't know the kind of person you are, a pattern that others made may prevail in the world, and following the wrong God home, we may miss our star. For there is many a small betrayal in the mind, a shrug that lets the fragile sequence break, sending with shouts the horrible errors of childhood, storming out to play through the broken dike. And as elephants parade holding each elephant's tail, but if one wanders, the circus won't find the park. I call it cruel, and maybe the root of all cruelty, to know what occurs, but not recognize the fact. And so I appeal to a voice, to something shadowy, a remote, important region in all who talk. Though we could fool each other, we should consider, lest the parade of our mutual life get lost in the dark. For it is important that awake people be awake, or a breaking line may discourage them back to sleep. The signals we give, yes or no or maybe, should be clear. The darkness around us is deep.
Parker, thank you. And I think we'll just do a quick announcement and then bring today's session to a close. So we have some exciting news for next year. And Claire, maybe I can pass it to you for the first part of this, if that works, or do you want me to do this? Okay, perfect, thanks. So we are going to reconvene next year in February, on February 8th, so the second Tuesday of the month. And we'll be doing a webinar where Parker and Sharon will be joined by a guest, David Simas, who leads the Obama Foundation. And the topic is well-being and leadership. And so just to say, we're really excited about this first session in this short series next year that is really about building up towards the Wellbeing Summit that we're going to be hosting in Bilbao next year. And I think we're going to put a link into the chat. Parker and Sharon in different ways will be acting as hosts of the summit, and we'll be traveling together through different topics to Bilbao and in Bilbao. And we're very, very excited to begin to start to share this work as well. So I'll just put a link in the chat so people can have that. And so as you can see, there's a lot more to come. We're feeling really excited about this. And I think the place for closing today is by really saying, first, thank you to Sharon and to Parker. They have just been extraordinary to journey with, to meander with, to be present with through this year, and have shared this as a gift of tremendous generosity with all of us. A thank you to the team of us that have worked on this, and this is Robin, who's been our wizard in many different ways with everything related to the webinar, to Alice and Erica on the Wellbeing project end, who've really quarterbacked this entire series and help put it all together, to Nancy Mortefi, the Dean of the Inner Work Programs at the Wellbeing Project, who really helped craft the overall curriculum for this program. And I think I hope that I've remembered everyone. So if not, just know that the intention is there. And also thank you to Claire, who's been a wonderful partner in crime in hosting this series. And most of all, we'd love to say thank you to all of you and to everyone that's participated in the series, that's come along for the journey, that's been present and brought your presence into this space. We've all created this container together. And we're looking forward to this container reconvening next year. So thank you, everyone. And so with that, our session in the series for the year comes to a close. And so maybe what we could do is turn on our cameras, turn on our microphones, and this is a great moment to check out just so that we can all hear each other, and Parker and Sharon as well. Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
For a wonderful
Thank
year.
you.
Thank you.
A wonderful year. Thank you for all your efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Parker.